Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Humanities Institute event. This year's theme, for those who are joining us for the first time, is a broader history of thought, where we explore ideas outside of European influence on their own terms. Now, just as a reminder of the format, those students who are on the panel may ask questions directly during our discussion segment at the end. Everyone else in the audience, please enter any questions you might have into the Q&A function, and I will ask them on your behalf, time permitting, at the end. To introduce our topic and speakers for today, since this event is a special collaboration between the Humanities Institute, Media Studies and Art History, I would like to pass the mic over to Professor Jane Mee from the Media Studies Department here at Scripps College. But you have to unmute first, Jane.
Thanks, Yuval, for that reminder, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm so delighted that we are having this talk today. Thank you, Humanities Institute, for hosting us, and thank you, Professor Julia Lum, for helping co-host. We wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement. Julia, myself, and a host of other Scripps faculty are in the process of understanding the role of the land acknowledgement at Scripps, including in online spaces. So as we engage with this learning, we invite feedback and participation from you as well. Specifically, we invite you to research the native lands from which you are joining us using this link in the chat box, and to name the land that you are zooming in from, because we're gathering from everywhere. We recognize that the Claremont colleges, including Scripps College, are settled on the shared and unceded lands of the Tongva, Serrano, and Kahuli people, many of whom continue to steward the land, their ancestral home. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Tongva people. We recognize that every member of the 5 Cs community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's foundings. We recognize that the statement of territory acknowledgement can only serve as a partial resolution in a decolonial process, which must make broader measures to understand and reconcile with the colonial history of this land. And so without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, Lisa Reihana, whom I've known for quite some time, but admired for much longer. She is of the Ngāpuhi, Ngāti, Hine, and the Ngāti tribes. She's also a multidisciplinary artist whose practice spans film, sculpture, costuming, and body adornment, text, and photography. Since the 1990s, Reihana has significantly influenced the development of contemporary art and contemporary Māori art in Aotearoa. She has earned an outstanding reputation as an artist and producer, where her attention to the complexities of contemporary photographic and cinematic languages is expressed in a myriad of ways. Her ability to harness and manipulate seductively high production values is often expressed through portraiture, where she explores how identity and history are represented. Exploring colonization, gender, and representations of indigenous people, she often looks to how stories of the past are told, or those points in the past have been overlooked. So please join me in welcoming Lisa Reihana.
Kia ora koutou. My greetings to the Humanities Department, to Scripps College, and to all those colleagues out there. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to share some of my art practice with you. I just clicked on the link to show you where I'm coming from. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon here. I come from Aotearoa, otherwise known as New Zealand. Zealand named by a Dutchman, Abel Tasman. Aotearoa was actually named by a woman, Kupe's wife, who discovered the land and saw it. She discovered it thinking, she said, look, there are the clouds, the long white clouds. And just, I love this little link because I hadn't looked at it before, but to let you know, the iwi that I come from is Ngāpuhi. It's this land here. And there are 9 mountains, maunga, that that line around this area. And if you are born within this space, then you are allowed to call yourself Ngāpuhi. It's a big confederation of tribes, and from that my iwi are Ngāti, Hine and Ngāi too. So thank you for acknowledging that, Miss Sienna Mai Jane. Look, it's my pleasure to take this opportunity to share a number of projects with you. So I'm just going to jump in and talk to you initially. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to exit out of that and take it back up to here. So here we go. I wanted to share a major project which I think has very much captured people's imagination around the world. It's a project that I was working on for, it actually took 10 years to complete. It's funny, as an artist, coming up with this sort of idea and then not knowing how to create it technically and embarking on it, then it's a bit like building a house. They say if you knew what you knew at the end, you probably would never have started. However, In Pursuit of Infected is a very large video work that was inspired by a French scenic wallpaper called Les Sauvages de la Mer Pacifique. And it's a very interesting work because it happened, it was produced in 1804, and in response to the stories of Captain Cook and his navigation around the Pacific. It's a very interesting work because it's highly politicized and it's highly aestheticized. It's a beautiful thing. And it actually became very, very popular. And its popularity grew out of the fact that Captain Cook, when he traveled around the Pacific, there was the inclusion of artists. And so it was the first time these journeys were illustrated. And so they really captured the imaginations of the people who couldn't travel. It was this sort of early period of armchair travel. For me, it's also an incredible piece of technology because what it represents is the shift from tapestry making in France was like a very highly regarded artistic endeavor, but very, very slow process. And we're shifting from that into print technologies and the beginning of wallpaper. Now, these panoramic wallpapers started to circulate and were made possible because of hot air balloon technology. So Montgolfier, who was the first maker of hot air balloons in France, the first hot air balloons were made of paper, which is a very scary thought when you think that they're blowing hot, fiery air underneath them, hence the fact that a lot of them fell out of the sky. What Montgolfier did do, though, was create a technique where you could create much longer strips of paper. Prior to this, paper and wallpapers were just very small, more poster sized. So this work is sort of like an expansion of a whole lot of new technologies coming to pass at a particular point in time. And Dufour was an entrepreneur. He really was jumping on this moment and seeing what was capturing people's imagination to create this very, very large and beautiful work, which sort of was designed to tell stories about what he saw in the Pacific. For me, because of those kind of stories, I love this image here. While I was researching and in the process of making a video version of this work, I flew to Australia because they had a full set. And this is me taking a photo on an iPhone 200 years later, 200 years after this work was made, and I was about to remake it. On my screen is an early version, a kind of a test piece of video, just to see how they sat beside each other. Here you can see, this is one of the bands. There's 20 strips that make the full breadth of this wallpaper, and it is collected in many different places around the world. This is a strip from the Honolulu Museum of Art. They have a full set of the 20 strips. And again, here's us researching, looking at the original print. They're actually incredibly beautiful works in themselves. One of the issues that I had when I first encountered the wallpaper was the fact that the wall text in the museum said it was Pacific people, but in a way I couldn't really see them. I didn't recognize them because it was seen through the lens of a French lens, and the costuming was designed for an opera that was performed in France in the 1800s. So my work and my remaking of this work was probably a type of reclamation, a way of giving voice to Pacific people, allowing them to re-look at these ceremonies and these histories, and as talent of today, being embodying the DNA of their ancestors, people who may have even seen the first explorers arrive on their shores. In Pursuit of Venus is an incredibly large work. It's 24 meters long by about 3 meters high. But what it did, it opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of researching and working with a whole lot of different type of organizations beyond the walls of what you might imagine that artists do when they're presenting work in art galleries. So I selected a number of scenes that I wanted to recreate. I think there's up to about 70 of them in all. But each one had its own research that sat behind it. And this is me looking at a chief mourner costume from Tahiti. So I chose various scenes to reenact for all sorts of different reasons. One of them is because Joseph Banks, there's a story of him when he arrived in Tahiti, joining a group and going on a killing ceremony with the chief mourner. So I found this incredibly fascinating. It's this kind of moments where Europeans were interacting with new people and then sort of going native, and what they were prepared to do, once you're masked up or in this kind of black up. When this ceremony takes place, it's after the chief of a village has passed. And this incredible costume comes out. Some people might never even see it in their lifetime. But it's this moment of pandemonium and chaos. And the chief mourner keeps everybody in line, goes out on what they call a killing spree in the morning and in the evening, until the new chief is chosen, and then peace reigns again. So it's this kind of idea of chaos and the value of having a leader. It was really interesting for me. I love fashion and I love costuming, but to go and look at these beautiful, what we call most people call them artifact. In Māori, we call it a taonga or a treasure. So a lot of time I was looking at some of these materials, and these are materials that you can't even collect anymore because maybe the flora or the fauna doesn't exist. The other thing, I went into the Royal Society. We were thinking about the notion of time. And this is the clock that accompanied Captain Cook's voyage on Endeavour. So this clock was used when he was illustrating and recording the transit of Venus from Tahiti. It's a very interesting design. It's got tripod legs. So it was bolted underneath the ship. And the dial on the face is very different to how we understand a clock today. But this clock really is the clock that introduced Greenwich Mean Time. Here I have an image. This is really incredible. Tupaia, he was a Tahitian navigator who joined Captain Cook and Joseph Banks, under his protection. This is his illustration of a chief mourner costume. It's really important because in a way it's the first example of a Pacific person doing a more Western style of illustration. What's beautiful about it when you start to look at the colours and the materials that are used, and in my version of him doing this drawing, what I did is I had him sitting with a group of women who are making tapa cloth, because the dyes that are used on this watercolour are tapa cloth dyes, or like the colours of tapa cloth dyes. So it's these kind of moments of sharing between new encounters, artists, new peoples, and that sharing goes both ways. While making this work, it was quite a complex project to undertake, particularly because Captain Cook, he looms large in our histories down here particularly. The Cook Islands are named after Captain Cook. The Firth of Thames in Auckland. Thames, of course, is a name from England. You travel around the world and you understand that these explorers were naming and claiming constantly wherever they travelled. This was taken, I was lucky enough to have a residency in a studio in Montalvo in America. And it really gave me the space and time to just sort of collect images off the internet and just print them out and just spend a lot of time with them and really try and understand what that period of time might have been like. What was Captain Cook really like as a person? Clearly he was a good leader. Same with Joseph Banks. I mean, these figures are seen as heroes or the terrible harbingers of colonisation. But actually we know people have sort of fall somewhere in between those. So for me, it was really trying to imagine what these men may have been like and what the world was like at that time. And then go into a casting situation. So this was me working with a really cool Pacific theatre company in Auckland. And this was the first event when we managed to bring together a whole lot of actors and young actors, students, and talk to them about my ideas and hopes for recreating what was a wallpaper, which is based around the time of colonisation, and to bring new story, a new way of thinking for the audience, and a new way of interacting with art. The way I went about making the work and creating the work, everything was shot on green screen, which most people will be familiar with. If you're not, it's something that they use in studios. In the weather, a weather person is actually standing in an empty room and they're pointing at maps which are generated behind them. So that's like a CGI, a computer generated illustration. And that's the way that I was able to kind of create this new aesthetic of working with local indigenous people and then giving them a platform for their stories to be told. This is to give you a sense of what the work looked like in a gallery situation. The camera is quite far back so that you can take in the full width of the screen. The width of the screen is, as I said before, about 24 meters. And so what I found is some people would come in and come in several times to view the work because there was multiple stories, little vignettes happening across the width of the screen. And I think the interesting thing, it took me about 7 years to get to this point, by the way, just assembling all this knowledge and people and technically to pull it together. But when it came back and you see it from this standpoint, it is a little bit like a tapestry. So it really, and I worked in it in a similar fashion. I love textiles, and I think what we did is I worked with a smaller number of actors and talent, and they would play multiple characters. So I think the next slide, I'm going to stop, I'm going to sit here. Oh, this is an image in a gallery. Of course, it's been shown around the world, probably in about 30 different presentations. For museums, it's great for them because they can show their Pacific collections. And I think what the value of this work is a great reminder of the people who make these works and the great quality and the skill that goes behind them. I've got just an image here of me in the studio showing the process of the filming. So on the left-hand side, that's working within a green screen situation. And the one on the right-hand side, just keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to this. After working inside a green screen studio, I really needed to relax my eyes and actually go out into the real world. But I think the next slide, we're going to show a little sequence from In Pursuit of Venus.
Yes, so you've been several. I'm just, all I'm here is to, I just need to take this. So, let's keep it ready. Well, actually, there's one or two things I thought you'd be able to do yourself. I'm plugging in. This one, later. Oh. Yes. Not particularly good at it. Much more. But you wouldn't see a fixed quality like this at all. See, the first thing you might not want That's a telescope. Right here. It allows me to be small, very large. Sun. I'm observing the crossing of Venus. The second blue planet crosses with the sun. Very hot. The blue. By observing one crossing the other. Yes, yes, so we're here. So
In Pursuit of Venus has travelled the world now, and it's been really interesting to see how it's been picked up by various different groups, different organisations. And while I was making In Pursuit of Venus, there was an opportunity to really start to question the idea of this wallpaper. In some ways, I felt like I was sort of stuck in somebody else's world, another person's worldview, and I wanted to take the opportunity to utilise, in particular, the Chief Mourner's costume and see how it operated in a true landscape, in a real landscape, outside of this kind of this world, which is In Pursuit of Venus, is always set at 2:00 in the afternoon. So, and at that time, my father was quite unwell, and I was sort of thinking about mourning practices, and I was learning about them because I knew that I wanted to look at Captain Cook's death in Pursuit of Venus. So I came up with creating a new work called Taiwaki, House of Death. It started life as a short, 15-minute short film. And through it, I was examining the different gender roles. What were the roles that men played and what were the roles that women played? Where did we sit in this space? This is a installation shot in a show called Dead Ringers, which is in Perth. I loved its positioning. It's sitting next to a group of Puimanu poles. So these are Aboriginal burial poles. I readapted the work into a 2-screen project, and then this was played in the Bishop Museum in Hawaii. And I chose the Bishop Museum because at the time it was having a lot of financial difficulties, but also down below where these screens were suspended is a Chief Mourner's costume. Also for me, it was like really taking a sort of contemporary work and placing it in museums, you know, that idea of time being unbroken, artistry being unbroken, and the types of works and ideas and philosophies are constantly embedded in an artist's thinking, no matter what the form or the format that the work takes. So, and this is an image of the work installed at Auckland Art Gallery, where I had the two different screens sort of sitting opposite each other. I had a very, very shiny floor, so the screens reflected. So when you walked into the space, you couldn't quite tell where you were. And we always talk about, in Māoridom, the underworld. Other people talk about heaven, we talk about the underworld. So I wanted to kind of affect that feeling for the viewer. There was also mist in the room, and you can sort of see a ray of light. That's actually the projectors projecting onto the wall. But it's quite nice. It sort of looked at the apparatus of making and how you get to see these works. But also I was really interested in this idea that when the spirit passes, it moves toward the light. And I was trying to think about these things in a really regenerative way and from a feminine perspective. And those kind of stories of when people pass and they have these near-death experiences and they talk about moving towards the light. And I suppose it is a rebirth. That notion of rebirth is the idea of the baby moving through the canal, the birthing canal, into the world of light. So this image here on the left-hand screen is the passing of a Māori warrior. And on the right-hand side is Papatuanuku, who is our Māori goddess of death. But she is also the goddess of dreams. So in this next slide, I think we're ready to play another short sequence from it. So while making that work, I was looking at, sorry, I'm just finding my keynote again. It seems to drop out every time we shift around. The use of masks, because one of the things that I discovered in Māoridom is that images of our ancestors were never undertaken until they'd passed. So I don't know how hard it is to see because these images are quite small. In a gallery situation, they're very large and much easier to read. But my warrior, as he dies, sort of a mask comes over his face. So it's just a way for me to really think about remembering why it is we didn't have photography. So photography was through our carving practices. But those carving practices were only given to ancestors. Once they passed, we could remember them. It's also the idea of preserved heads. They would be brought out, they'd be preserved so we could be remembered every year after their passing. The woman is like that idea of bloodletting. It sort of represents the pain that is felt, but also sometimes to feel again. So it was a really amazing project to work on, and an incredible counterpoint to the ideas embodied in Pursuit of Venus. So my work is often looking at, you know, it's for me as an urban woman, and brought up in Auckland, which is the biggest city in New Zealand, at a time when it was not cool to be of Māori descent. The thing that art has proven to me to be is a way of reclaiming knowledge and creating works that I can share with other people, creating sort of, it's almost just like a prop that we can discuss ideas around. And then also it becomes something that opens up doors for new learning. So for me, looking at our whakapapa, which is the Maori word for our ancestry, always goes back to gods. We're all gods and goddesses, which is a really nice thought, but I've tried to think about them differently. So Ihi is a work that I opened, it's a work that was made last year, and in it I was, I just wanted to show some of the thinking when I'm making things, costume ideas, what do gods and goddesses look like? We got kind of excited by the Venus Willendorf and this idea of women, you know, being the progenitors and, you know, could be like eggs. And I actually did try to make a costume with balloons, but I don't recommend it. They move around a lot. They make great stills, but they're not so great in video. As an artist, and this is for a very, very large LED screen, they end up being about 9 meters high and 3 meters wide, 2 different sides. So I needed to understand the architecture of the space and the scale of the work that we were making before I sort of set about it. But because there was 2 screens, I settled on the idea of working with 2 characters. So on the left-hand side, we have Tāne, and on the right-hand side, we have his mother, Papatuanuku. So she's the Earth Mother. And I wanted to work with these 2 because I was really interested in not the story of Papatuanuku and her husband, Ranganui, but this intergenerational idea. And what does it mean? Again, kind of riffing off this idea of people passing. It's the succession and who stands up to take the next role. As one person dies, another rises. It's the idea of a beautiful tree in the forest falls and something else takes its place. And I've always been interested in female characters, and they're often not written about so much. But learning about Papatuanuku, they always talk about the 70 sons, but of course there are 70 female equivalents. And so I wanted to represent her as being pregnant all the time. I mean, if you had 140 children, it was quite a busy day. So I've got this gorgeous image of my friend Nancy, who I got her cast in that role, and Tāne, and he is playing all the brothers of Tāne. I think this is a slide that we can play. work ends with, I was really interested in sort of this idea of motherly love, and it was wonderful for me to have this opportunity to really think about our ancestors and the way that we view our creation stories and who they might be. And I was really thinking about before the worlds were created, there's different personifications of the universe, even the Big Bang Theory, that could be read as very scientific, but the way that our stories are, I don't like to use the word myths because that makes it feel like it's not true, but it's the way that our knowledge and tikanga is passed down through the ages. I've got one last project to share with you, and this is called Nomads of the Sea, Te Waingunguru. And this work, I wanted to work on this because it's about the first, really thinking about the first European woman that lived in New Zealand. And I'm pretty sure it is this woman, but it may have been another. But of course, there would have been the first. Her name was Charlotte Badger, and she was incarcerated in the Parramatta female factory and then transferred to Tasmania, where she stole a ship called Venus, and she ended up in the far north of the North Island, very close to where my father's people are from. So I thought this was a great, and as a woman, there's not a lot written about her, and it may not be true, but it's a great sort of premise to begin a story to look at women's business at this time. She ended up in New Zealand in 1804, which is the same time as the French Senate wallpaper was being produced, and so I found these really interesting kind of histories. I've been looking back a lot, but I was just really interested in how they there's different views of history according to who's telling it. And for me to create such a work as this was really learning about script writing, working with actors, and this was more like a kind of a professional crew. This project, I'd always wanted to make a 3D film. I don't ever want to make one again, but it was great to have the opportunity at the time. And I was luckily allowed to work in Sir Peter Jackson's studio down in Wellington, the Stone Street Studios, and with the Weta Workshop. So I got to work with his 3D camera. And I was interested in this because I really wanted to pitch this idea of Charlotte Badger living under the protection of a Māori chief in the far north, and what that might mean for other tribal members, and what it might mean for the other women of his hapu. So on the left, you can see that's the camera, there were two cameras strapped together that we're working with. And on the right-hand side, we'd sort of devised shooting it almost like a theatre piece inside a black square. So that's the grip guys unpacking and getting the work together. And here I am, I wanted to sort of start the film with a fight sequence. So for me, it was learning about the difficulties of fighting and what that means from a health and safety perspective, and just the training that it takes for the actors as well. Incredible amount of work goes into some of those fight sequences that you watch. Here's just a couple of images of a lot of my time as a filmmaker. There's the kind of fundraising, writing part of it. There's a lot of communication that's done in a conceptual manner, and then there's the pre-production for the film, then there's the filmmaking. But a lot of my time is actually spent assembling the work with technical people in the background. So this is, initially we thought we were going to do the 3D down in Wellington, but they got the Avatar series, so they're shooting 4 avatars right now, so we had to learn how to do it ourselves. So this is me with an image of Sam Tozer, who I work with, as he was trying to work out how to create 3D out of this miles of data that we collected. I think what we'll do is play a bit. Oops. Could we play the sequence, please?
Kōrero wa toku mamai matuku te aha.
E hana ia koe tēnei wai! Hoi anō, ko tāku e titiro!
Job for you. Clean up. Get it done proper. Not like last time. There. Come on. Mind you're pretty good then, ain't you, hey?
Don't you touch me!
Oh.
Don't you come anywhere near me!
Don't you try that on me, mistake.
So that was I don't know, every time I try and make something new, I'm sort of testing myself and my skills and the ability to tell stories. And also, not only was the film 3D, it was shot all in Te Reo Māori and language. So working with some people from up north to oversee the language of that time, not of this time, but of that time, and trying to make it clear and simple enough to translate ideas not just embodied in the language, but in the way that people are and the kind of way that they dressed, and using costume to tell other parts of the story. While I was making this, I got invited to show, and well, this is one of the issues I have, is being invited to show in different biennales, and everybody wants exclusivity. And the issue I have is being able to make enough work fast enough, but to make it different, because I was pitching it for the Sundance Institute at the time, I had to do a sort of an extended version of it, and then I turned it into 3 screens and included some other figures and characters, a guy called Storyteller. And this is an image when I developed it further, where there was 3 screens of 3D, and I went out and collected a whole lot of landscape to kind of augment the feeling of the time, going into primordial forests. But essentially, it was really looking at these 2 women notions of survival and really giving them both a lot of mana and a lot of power. I felt like that was something that I wanted to embody and show to the audience. So this is Storyteller. I suppose in a way this is me. My work is not always looking back at the past, although it's really instructional to look at the past to kind of understand where you are and to think about how you can embody ideas and push people further, or even try and entice them into thinking about history in a different way, what it might have felt like to be there. And this image here is a combination of I made my own gourd hats, but wanted to put this figure somewhere in the past. It's like tradition and future together. We have a terminology that people are using down here, polyfuturists. You have the Afrofuturism movement, and it's something I'm very much thinking about at present time for my future works, which are set in the future as opposed to always looking back to the past. Certainly the thing that I've learnt as a Māori woman is to look back to the past and carry what you can from that and utilise it as a tool in the work that you do. So right now I'm going to stop sharing because that's kind of enough from me, if I can. Maybe let's just exit out of that. And oh, here I am. Here is everybody. Cool. That's my talk for the moment.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm Julia Lum. I'm professor of art history at Scripps. I think I speak for all of us, myself and my colleagues, in expressing my appreciation for this wonderful talk on your work and just getting insight into the behind the scenes elements of all of this work that you've done. So we're going to take just a few minutes, Jane and I, to ask just maybe one question each, and then we're going to open it up to discussion with your students. We're really grateful that you're here to also speak to them as well. I was interested in this idea of time as a continuum of, as you know, the practice of connecting the past to the present. You're always sort of thinking about history in your works, and you know, I'm interested in thinking about the fact that your work engages recent technologies, always kind of on the cutting edge. You're always kind of future proofing your works, thinking about how to, you know, utilize things like the 3D technology. But how do you see that connecting to perhaps technology? Do you see language, for instance? You emphasized Māori as you know, the importance of including that. Do you see Māori technologies as built into that, you know, understanding of that word as well?
Well, I even think about I love the word technology and I love the word engineering. When I'm even looking at taonga or artifacts at the museum, speaking with other artists and learning about what the tools that they've learned about and what they know. I mean, there's actually an incision on the front of a waka. And what that's designed to do is to peel through the waves and pull the waves so they don't splash into the faces of the rowers or the kaihui. I mean, to me, that is like genius. It's just a really simple idea, but it makes all the difference in the making and for the people who are undertaking the work. So for me, you know, I've often steered away from Te Reo Māori because I didn't have it. And my father is of that generation where it was beaten out of him and seen as something that wasn't valued. But certainly more and more within Aotearoa and around the world, there are language nests, and it was really wonderful to sort of start to explore that in my work. But of course, once you start talking about using language, then I'm working with actors, and you know, like you're sort of stepping up your own skill set as well. I'm interested in technology because I'm interested actually in the children of tomorrow, and I'm thinking about the works that I make, that they can stick around for a while. I mean, technology comes and goes, but hopefully these can be played for a long period of time. As an artist, I look at other people's works. You know, we go to galleries around the world and you might look at a Van Gogh or something even, you know, older, things that are thousands of years old. And so I'm very much thinking as an artist and in the canon of that work. History is something to be played with and it's to be understood in many different ways, because of course it is. And I think that's where postmodernism, or how I understood when I first started to hear about it and think about it, was really about, you know, multiple ways of seeing, and you can't always direct people's thinking in a particular way. But I try in my work to sort of open it up in a way and not scare people off, but enough that they want to explore something and maybe think about it differently than they may have previously. So I, you know, and that notion of time, I know the circling around that last word, Nomads of the Sea, we really wanted to take this idea of In Pursuit of Venus passes before your eyes, and it is an actual loop. So there's a time notion, and it's a very Pacific way of thinking. The beginning and the end, they're all connected because it's continuous. So there is a continuous loop. And then dancing around Nomads of the Sea, we created the circular stage. So we're actually looking in at time, sort of investigating it, seeing what was happening in there from a different perspective. So there's, you know, that thing about time I find really interesting. And then when I was asked to kind of, expand on the project and to bring in other characters that can almost comment on it, it's a very theatrical device, but it kind of jumps people out of history and now. And I'm really trying to situate people, the audience, and that they're feeling like they're in something. And that's, you know, it's quite a hard thing to pull off on a gallery situation, because if you're going to the cinema, for instance, is very much a one-point perspective, whereas I'm kind of interested if people feel like they want to talk to each other while they're in the room. So there's a sort of another layer that their life and what they're thinking and feeling becomes tied in to the work. So it kind of expands into the real world.
Yeah, that's really well put. And it's very much about the encounter as well. I'm going to turn it over to Jane. Before I do, I wanted to apologize. Tāmaki was supposed to join us for today's talk. And I want to mention that he sends his regrets. He had an unavoidable conflict. So we're sorry to miss him. We have plenty to talk about with Lisa. So Jane, did you want to take it away as well?
I always have a lot of questions for Lisa, but I think I'm going to pick one that's a little bit relevant to our students today. So maybe it goes back into kind of some older work as well. I think I'm really drawn, after watching some of these pieces multiple times, how there's a reference in regards to like women interacting with women and also women as leaders. And since we're at Scripps as a all women's college, and also your work yourself with, you know, Pacific Sisters, or seeing like Rosanna Raymond appear back in your works. Can you just talk a little bit about that and the collaboration and the powerful like relationships that you have with other women that make your work possible?
I suppose it comes very much from my family background. I have 3 sisters, so there was 4 girls in my family, and my father told us that we could do anything. So that was really great. It was a different kind of form of feminism, I suppose. I just didn't think that I couldn't not do anything. So, which is, and then therefore other people couldn't either. So that's a slightly different way of thinking about it. And I remember even going through art school, are you a feminist? And it's such a loaded question, and there's so many different ways around it. But you know, it is about humanity and where you can place yourself. Certainly, I feel that there's an opportunity to bring women's stories to the fore, because I do feel comfortable with them. In some ways, I feel less comfortable telling men's stories. I have to find something that makes it authentic to me. I have to find something that doesn't ring untrue, and I don't, for instance, there's an artwork I made many years ago. I did a series called Digital Marae, and I was looking at Maui, and I know Maui, he looms large here in Māoridom, but of course he's right across the Pacific. And I was trying to think about him as a figure, and there are some amazing customary and contemporary carved works made by men of him. And he's often sort of shown as this rippling, muscly guy, which he probably would have been, but maybe not, you know, he could have been strong in other ways. And it took me a long time until I sort of struck upon an idea. And his full name here is Maui Tiki Tiki Ataranga. So he was born and sat in his mother's hair and sent out to sea. He was not full-term baby, so she thought he'd passed and she sent him out to sea. So he has this oceanic connotation to him. And so instead my version of Maui is him surfing, because I love the idea of him. There's the energy and the strength and the beauty in his relationship to the ocean. And I just felt like that was a way of, as a woman, sort of thinking about him. I was like, well, what would Maui do? What do gods do on the weekends? Surely he must go surfing as well. And for me, it was also making a connection to Hawaii and, you know, our own Pacific histories. So it doesn't sit at just here, but in a broader sense. So yes, I've worked with a number of different groups. I think as a filmmaker, there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen, but certainly I'm a member of Pacific Sisters. It's a collective that kind of began in the late 80s, early 90s by women. And there were men could be sisters as well. But certainly there was this incredible energy in urbanism and music. Like there was great new kind of hip hop was coming up, and designers, and you know, they're on the street. People are living in the city, because I lived in the city, and there was like some cool cats, you know, cool cats living in the city, and we were sort of taking it over and taking it on, and sort of asserting a new visuality. There was a group called Sama, and they were like a model talent agency, and so they were bringing together all sorts of different diversity. They were bringing diversity to the fashion world. What else was happening? Yeah, there was the beginning of record labels, and there was just this incredible energy that was happening on the street. So as a group, we started meeting, and there was a lot of eating going on. One of the things that we would do is come together, bring food, and we would have like weaving circles. We were thinking about what our ancestors used to do, and that's sit around and collectively like make things together. And then we would share the various bits of knowledge that we had, and by putting it into a pool and sharing that knowledge, we all came out with more. We continue to do that today. We don't always have, you know, it's an expensive thing. People are sort of far flung across the world, but various projects go on. It's very unfortunate. This weekend, this event has just been cancelled due to COVID lockdown. But a couple of years ago, Pacific Sisters were commissioned to make free costumes, which are in the Auckland Museum. It was it's very ceremonial. The handing over of a costume begins by the dressing of a model and a procession to the staff, the laying down of a fala or a mat, and then the removing each of the body adornment and components of the costume and laying them down, so that the person who's accessioning it into the collection sees the order that it happens. But everything is named, and it's a very personal. It's all face to face. It's kanohi ki te kanohi. So this is an example of the types of, I mean, people use the word performance, but just the way that you go about doing the things that you do. So this is one of the, you know, some of the projects that I've done with Pacific Sisters. But it's a way of drawing together, you know, getting gorgeous young kids off the street, showing them various different types of creativity, giving them an opportunity to play live music, or, you know, just involve themselves. And it's sort of like really about positivity.
Thank you. Yuval, should I hand it over to you to facilitate questions and to maybe have
Sure, yeah.
audience?
I think we'd like to open it up first to some of the students in the panel to see if any of you have any questions first, and then I'll go to the audience questions. So any students have any questions or comments?
There are actually some that have been typed up here. Is that what I should be replying to? There's some coming in on the live feed. I haven't done this before. It says type answer. Well, I can't type.
I didn't actually realize that you could read those. So you.
Yeah, I can. So
yes, please feel free.
Okay.
Feel free. You can take them in order. Sure.
Okay, so Christian Fanine Schmidt, his, gosh, sorry, she, her, they, we, I'll say we, forgive me because I'm not sure. When you say James Cook was a good leader and everyone falls somewhere in between hero and villain, how is that helpful for Indigenous peoples who are trying to fight colonisation in our education? Okay, that's colonisation. Yes, we have to fight it in many ways. I suppose it's interesting to make works for me. My philosophy is trying to create a space for other people of all persuasions to come into and reassess where they sit in it. So when I first showed the work in Auckland, it was really interesting. Young people, old people, older Europeans. I remember being in a lift and they didn't know who I was. They go, oh, we're going up to see this work, and and it's about, it's like, we weren't very nice, were we? They were sort of reassessing some of the histories, questioning the stories that they've been told. So, I mean, I'm hoping that my work can affect things like that. I'm also, within that work, I think it's really hard to look at the world in a didactic manner, because I think people are much more, there's so many more shades of grey in between. And I initially started out feeling very anti Captain Cook when I embarked on this project, but reading a lot about him, I mean, he's been seen as the harbinger of colonisation, but of course there are a whole string of people, and it's really relates back to notions of greed. And there are greedy people, there are good people, there are people who work in many different ways out in the world. And so I just want to pose that in the work as well. So not all brown people are good people, not all white people are bad people. It's just somewhere in between. Colonisation and education, well, I believe that learning takes place at all times, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to even understand myself. I feel I'm a really kind of soft advocate, activist. There are people who have a different type of activism. Sometimes it's very blunt. Mine is a slightly different thing. I think it's very much generated from the fact that my mother is European. She's Welsh, English and Jewish, and my father is by and large Māori, but he has Irish and Scottish blood. So it's very hard for me to be anti a particular race, because I know the sorts of racism that my mother experienced as a result of being a partner to my father. And she's a good person. So I'm trying to constantly tease out these sort of things in between. I don't know if that's the answers your question fully, or if it's the answer that you'd like to hear, but these are some of the ideas that I think about when I'm making work. The second question I have here is from Emily Christopher. Oops. I'm struck by the auditory impact of In Pursuit of Venus Infected. In addition to the powerful visuals, what was the process like for deciding what music audio to include? Moreover, in all of your works, which consider so many aspects of art, how do you keep everything intentional? Choices of filming angles, composition, colours, sounds, etc. Cool. Okay, well, let's talk about the audio. My partner, James, is a musician and a sound engineer, and he actually did the sound design for this project. We spent so much time dying in data, being absolutely drowning in data, I should say, that we never really even heard the soundtrack and saw the visuals together until it first showed, and we had maybe a couple of days to see it together. but we were recording each little scene or vignette on its own, and then preparing that for placement within the wallpaper space. But when we first heard it, it was like a cacophony. There was just too much noise, and so we had to pull out things. I have to, hand on heart, say initially I didn't imagine I would have used the actors' voices. It was all going to be a sound work. But I think having the voices embedded in it definitely brought the work to life and gave it a resonance. So it was really thinking about if the te reo was good, if there were things that I liked, that I heard. For instance, one of the actors is after Captain Cook has died on Kaliakakua Bay, Kalialakekua, he was returned in pieces, his hat and his thigh. And one of the actors says, "Oh, where's the rest of him?" I thought it was so hilarious. I just had to keep that line in there. And not many people hear it, but a few people hear it. But and I think it's hilarious is probably a bit too strong a word. But what it does, it implies the fact that that Captain Cook was he was dismembered into many, many pieces. In the work, there's an equality between some of the Pacific waiata and songs and dance practices, you know, like the drums that we're using. And then also there's some bark. And we chose bark because he was the popular musician of the time. So music that you would have heard on the streets, not that you pay $100 to go and hear a symphony orchestra play. He was the popular musician of the day, but also because of Bach's influence on church music through the islands. So there's always a reason to have these various things in there. The clock that I spoke about, we actually went to the Royal Society and recorded it. So there is the sound of, I got to, once a week, they rewind the father clock. It's not a father clock, but it needs rewinding. And so I recorded that sound of the gears going backwards. And we used that sound at the same moment, when just prior to Captain Cook being killed on the beach. And so it almost sort of talks about rewinding time and the effects of time, and that effect of what Captain Cook had through the islands. I mean, his job was to be a good captain and a good navigator. What he did, he was a great map maker, and he actually gave the blueprint through which the process of colonisation was sped up. But he didn't necessarily do it himself. He handed over the maps that allowed people to go and take these various resources. That process of empire was certainly underway, well underway, before the transit of Venus was being recorded. The process of the work, composition, well, I don't know, In Pursuit of Venus is one thing. It's all shot. It's shot like an illustration because it's very much inspired by the illustrations of the time. But working with different actors, that possibility of going out into the landscape and recording real landscapes. I mean, when you're working with a crew, you know, I would have liked to have spent more time doing some filming by the beach, but a lot of the cameras you use today, they're almost like open air computers, and you can't get water and salt and sea on them. So, you know, you end up collecting different types of landscapes. I mean, you're very much driven by the contingencies of what you're working with at the time. It was really nice working on that project. Jane would recognise Rosanna, and I've worked with her a number of times. You know, I've worked with a number of the sisters many times because we have a shorthand now that we've worked together for 30 years. And sometimes some of these ideas don't even necessarily need to be talked about so much when you're collaborating with people again and again. Yeah, it's something that kind of comes as a result of that. Shall I continue? I have one from Victoria Sancho Lobus. I enjoyed this presentation enormously. Thanks. Can you say a bit more about collaborations with museums? For example, do you participate in the selection of works shown alongside your films, printed matter, French wallpaper, Pacific collections? Do you specify requirements for the viewer experience, scale, size of space, seating? Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, these are, as an artist, for me, once you've done all this work, it's really important, the delivery of it for an audience member and how it's going to feel for them when they're viewing something. So I definitely, in galleries, I ask for comfortable seating. I really like to have velvet cushions and not vinyl cushions, because you stick to them, and if you're in a hot place, it's not very nice. I want people to sit and spend time with the works. So and I don't particularly like using bean bags because I find them really noisy, people coming in and out of the room. And so that really takes the audience member away from being in the work. And in a number of situations when I've worked with museums, they've talked about various collections that they might have, and we've discussed it, or sometimes I get the opportunity to help drive the selection of works. Often it's about what they can, what is in their collections, or what they can borrow or lend at that time. But we definitely talk about placement and how to make the most of it. And for me, this is a speaking through time, the fact that there are different tile artifacts and illustrations in the room. As an artist, it's like being in a group show. I've got this opportunity of, there's a conversation that's happening between my work and their work. And I certainly I have the privilege of looking at other collections from around the world. Okay, so there's another question here. I noticed, especially in Pursuit of Venus, there was a lot of dialogue that stood out. I remember in particular 2 characters talking about the Southern Cross. Were there any particular sources you pulled this dialogue from, or was this purely from your imagination of what was occurring at this time? This was the actors reacting to each little scene or vignette. I talked to them about why I was including it in the work and my sentiments for it. And then they kind of just freeformed, because originally we weren't going to use the dialogue. But interestingly, the actor who plays Joseph Banks is actually of Māori descent. So he was a language speaker. So it was really great. And one of the things that I wanted to show the audience is Joseph Banks. He was a Renaissance man and he was a linguist, and he ran the trading tables. And because he was running the trading tables, he was meeting a lot of local people and picking up language all along the way. So I wanted to demonstrate this quality about him in reality. But I also wanted to, of course, we always hear about all these different famous explorers and scientists around the world recording the transit of Venus. Beside him, there's an image of Tupaia, and I wanted to have him sort of doing a chant or to the sky, to the heavens, because Pacific people would have known that these events were taking place as well. So throughout the artwork itself, I'm always trying to say it wasn't just then, this was going on. These things were all happening at the same time. One of the big things for me is there's the Endeavour is sitting in the harbour, but there are also waka craft from all over the Pacific. And that was really to kind of state the fact that it wasn't discovered by them. We were already here. We'd already discovered it. So it's just kind of, this idea of practicing culture and imbuing it with that sense of survivalism. Okay, so there's one here. Why was it important to centre a white woman in one of your pieces? Okay, so that's speaking about nomads of the sea, Te Waingunguru. The work is about Charlotte Badger, and the reason she ended up in New Zealand was because she'd become incarcerated. But there's two women who are the lead actresses in the work. The other one is Puhi, and she is a third wife of the chief under who Charlotte is being protected. So I wanted to understand how women rose through the ranks at that time, and taking a leaf out of Joseph Banks's, learning about him. In that fight sequence, just at the beginning, I thought it was really interesting to start with a white woman speaking language and being spoken back in language. So there was this kind of looking at history in a slightly different way than other people might imagine it. When you see the full film, really the lead actress is Puhi, and there's a great fight between them, and it's really talking about what happened at this time, and I really it's the trade of muskets and the musket wars that happened in New Zealand, because a lot of that happened from the north of the North Island by my iwi, by our tribe, who started to bring them in large numbers. So it was really looking at the shift of power and who holds the power and how do you get power. So the chief was protecting this white woman because she had she created a sort of power too. What she represented, his ability to have a white woman, is also part of the equation. But I didn't want to premise either of them as being stronger than the other. Really, it's just looking at how do you gain power? What do you use? And for females, it's whatever it is. And I love the fact that they're both fighters. I'm just looking at the time here. And it's 2:26, and I haven't got through everything.
Yes, we are supposed to finish at 5:30 in our time zone,
Yes.
Scripps time zone. So I think we should end it there. But thank you so much for coming and for answering all these questions. Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll hope to see you at our next event.